Hello and welcome to U.S. History. Well, this has been quite the year in U.S. history as our country continues to go through so many different experiences in the face of this pandemic and an economic downturn, and so many of our own families facing struggles because of the pandemic. It has been quite the time to study U.S. history. We're also in the middle of a time when social unrest has come to a head once again in our country, and simply sitting by is not an option. This year, as we began to unpack U.S. history and we began to look at key moments from our past that have really directly influenced us, we began to think about the idea of narrative. We're all handed a story, something that we might not have even taken part in, or our families may have come here from other countries long after those situations began. But the past is not separate. It's a part of us. Our story, our narrative is a part of what's happened in the past, no matter when our family may have arrived here in America or if we've been here from the beginning. Our stories are directly influenced by actions of the past and our history. This year, we're working on a project called the Narrative Tree. And what we're doing is we're taking our American narrative, the story that we're told, but unpacking the truth behind it. We're not taking a sugar-coated version or a comfortable version of history. We're looking at the truth. And the truth means often examining things that are not always in history books, positive and negative, but trying to take those and really understand them so we can see perhaps the narrative we should be handed. We've been handed a narrative, but it's up to us what narrative we accept and what one we create. So this year we're working on creating our own narrative tree, similar to a family tree, but we're doing this about our American narrative because ultimately the stories that we accept and learn from and grow from become us. So our first branch to the tree is going to be the Reconstruction branch, and this first project highlighted that. One of the key things we talked about this year, was Reconstruction. We looked at how Reconstruction after the Civil War really has formed quite a bit of who we are right now, and how much of Reconstruction really has not ever ended. Or maybe we put it on the back burner and shouldn't have. Right now, our country is at a time when those situations from Reconstruction are still playing out in very real ways. Sometimes scary, sometimes impacting people around us, our own families, and our friends. It's been important this year that we look at that narrative that's been handed down and what should have been handed down. As we began to unpack the success of the Black community at that time that was incredibly dynamic, students began to see that sometimes the narrative we've been handed doesn't always share all the good parts. So we've been looking at those incredible parts of our American story that make us who we are today, and the parts that we should be focusing more on. As we examine this, they are creating a branch to the tree. The branch has three main parts. The three parts are, first, our American narrative. It's a summary of that time period from their perspective as a student. After they've looked at it, what's that time period basically about? The second part is about my own narrative. And what they're doing is they're looking at their very own life and how those parts of the past are still having implications on their life today, positive or negative, but how they still play out. How do the decisions that we made hundreds of years ago still play out today in our own American story, our own experience right here today in this society? And then the last box is about long-term impact on society. Nothing is separate from the current day. Everything plays out again and again, and things have long-term implications or threads throughout history that are still changing us and making us who we are. Sometimes there are things that are amazing that we need to highlight and celebrate and should be questioning why we're not celebrating them. Other times it's things that perhaps we need to change. Perhaps it's about having an honest conversation. And one of the honest conversations we've had to have this year is about the implications of slavery. Things that we didn't address, things that we didn't fix, and wounds that we've not healed, conversations we've not had, and things we need to be having as a society right now. All of these impact all of us because we're all connected. We're all here together as American citizens, and no matter how many things may divide us politically or culturally, ultimately we're all Americans here together. And it comes down to deciding to work together, understand each other, and truly hear the stories of each other and our experiences so that we can create the America that we want. We can create the narrative that we want. By the end of the year, we will have many branches to our tree, and there will be a reflective piece at the end that they create on all of the branches and how that has brought us together and what our narrative should be that they believe we've been handed, and what's the narrative we should be creating. This is a long-term project, but the first part is this reconstruction branch. A little warning, some of these can be pretty intense. Letting students reflect on their own experiences has really opened all of our eyes to how each other feels. We've spent time listening to each other's stories, and this is not simple. It can often be complicated, it can be divisive, and it can often leave people thinking about things they maybe hadn't really understood before or contemplated. Our own experience should be challenged by each other's experiences. We should want to become better, more knowledgeable, more open, and more understanding of each other. That's ultimately, I think, the goal of history. We only repeat it when we refuse to learn. But refusing to learn can also mean refusing to listen. And listening often means ownership of responsibility for things that have taken place, and ownership for also how we can play a role in changing it. I hope these projects inspire you, because they've definitely inspired each of us to be better, and has really made the students realize that history is still happening to us right now. Decisions are not separate, and perhaps we can make the difference. Enjoy.